This is something that had been in the pipeline for a long time, and something that, frankly, has been long overdue. We've been concerned, as indeed have members of the general public, been concerned for a long time about the declining numbers of Gibraltarian players, homegrown players that were taken to the field of play in our domestic competitions. And it had got to the point where the rule of one homegrown player was being observed. It was within the rules, but very strictly observed, to the point where, as we mentioned yesterday, one HGP would be replaced with another. So this was a very unsustainable position for us. We were fortunate in that the clubs have been involved and have embarked in this process with us. So this is very much a collaborative effort between the GFA and our member clubs. And we've now got to a point, the figure of 3 homegrown players is a figure that we've all agreed on. And it's something that is very pleasing from our perspective, because it genuinely means now that there will be a larger pool of Gibraltarian players that will be more regularly playing week in, week out for their clubs.
Why specifically is that an issue for the Gibraltar FA, that there are so few local players playing regular minutes?
Well, in a nutshell, it's because if trends continued as they were, we faced a very realistic prospect that within 5 to 10 years, perhaps even less than that, we wouldn't have a national team to speak of, or at least a national team of very poor quality and very low standards. Things are difficult enough for our national team as it is, when we face the Belgiums and Germanys of this world, but we need to have the conditions in place for our national team players to be able to play to their maximum potential. Not playing regularly for their clubs is something that would weaken their standard even further, so it was something that we wanted to address. We're also, as the Gibraltar FA, feel that our obligation is to support the Gibraltarian player. We entered UEFA to develop Gibraltarian football, and we were very concerned that we weren't doing that in effect, because a lot of foreign talent being attracted to our shores. In and of itself, not a bad thing, because we have seen the standard of football improve and the standard of our clubs improve. But it had now sort of, the balance had tipped the other way, and we were now facing a situation where very few Gibraltarians were playing regularly, and it was our obligation to act.
You sensed that this was a trend in local football. We've spoken about it previously, but the difference now is that you've studied it, you've looked at the statistics, and you've found that you can put a number on it, basically.
That's right. I mean, this is not an exercise that we haven't plucked 3 homegrown players from the air, and it's not an exercise that we've just embarked on in a very haphazard or half-hearted way. A lot of study has gone into this. We've looked during the course of the whole season at the use, or the lack of use in this case, of homegrown players. The statistics proved very worrying reading for us. So it's a process, as I said, that with the clubs, and that's one of the elements that's most pleasing for me, is the fact that the clubs have come on board with us on this. I don't want to give the impression that this is the GFA's work alone. It is the GFA driving it, but certainly with the support of the clubs, which speaks very highly of them, frankly. So it's a process that we've gone through based on the science, on the statistics, and that is something that we can feel confident that the work we've done and the fact that we've settled on 3 is the result of a very serious process.
Would it be fair to say as well that some fans may have lost interest in the local game because they know less of the players on the pitch and therefore, frankly, care a little bit less about them?
That's a very valid point. I think there are the attendances at the Victoria Stadium for domestic league matches are very low. It's very sad to see. And one of the reasons, without a shadow of a doubt, is the fact that Gibraltarians can no longer identify with the 11 men, 22 men that they're seeing on the field of play. Hopefully this is a step in the right direction and a step towards reversing all these worrying trends.
And you've said that you'll be reviewing this rule change. Is there a possibility of further changes in respect of homegrown players?
It's on the table. We'll conduct a review during the course of this season and then take a decision in collaboration with the clubs. But there is a possibility that we could increase the HGP rule even further. But there are also other changes in the pipeline. We've agreed broad principles with the clubs on a further change in season 2019-2020, which is not next season, but the season after, and that is to amalgamate the first and second divisions into a single unified league. Our preference is for a league of 14 teams, which will require us to sort of reassess the domestic licensing system so that clubs operate more professionally and with greater probity off the field of play as well as on it. But this is a process in which the specifics still have to be ironed out. We've committed with the clubs that we will use the time between now and the end of the calendar year to agree those specifics with them, particularly on the licensing front. But certainly the broad principle to unify the leagues has been agreed.
The thinking there is what? To remove the relegation stress from the equation?
Yep, and to provide clubs with stability. I think in our discussions with the clubs, one of the reasons why some perhaps less wise financial decisions have been made by our clubs, and I'm talking about spending so much money on foreign players, is the stresses and strains, the worry about relegation, the worry about disappearing as a Gibraltarian club effectively. And what we're doing with this move is to remove that from the equation, maintaining the competitive element of league football, but removing from the equation the concerns and the doubts that some clubs might have, and encouraging stability. The hope is that stability will encourage them in turn to invest in the development of Gibraltarian players rather than in the purchase of foreign players.
Think longer term.
Exactly.
Apart from the homegrown player rule change, you also introduced an intermediate league yesterday. What's the thinking in that?
Well, our thinking behind the introduction of the intermediate league is that we wanted to replace the under-18 youth league and the reserve league, which hadn't been working satisfactorily for the past number of seasons. And what we've done effectively is remove those two leagues, replace it with the intermediate league, which is a league that will function primarily for players between the ages of 17 and 23, which is a problem area in our football. We lose a lot of players to university, lack of interest in the game, we simply lose them from the game altogether. So what this league will do is hopefully maintain this age group involved in the game, but will also have an element of sort of rehabilitation and recuperation for older players that can use the intermediary league after an injury to come back into the game. We think that will work better than the under-18 and reserves league model, which hasn't, as I said, been working at all well for the past few seasons.